G'day and welcome to another episode of Cuppa with the Jesuit. I'm Father Robin Koning, the Provincial Assistant for Vocations for the Australian Jesuits.
With Father Robin, I'm Julian Butler, a Jesuit in formation, and we're joined by Father David Braithwaite. Father Dave, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Julian. Thank you, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Dave, you're joining us from Campion Hall at Oxford University. Could you tell us about what's brought you to be at Campion and what you're up to there?
Sure. Well, I am, I guess, halfway through a doctorate in theology, and I'm here doing some research and writing. And really, one of the great attractions of Oxford, it's kind of a bit of a wonderland for academics. You know, it's this extraordinary place where you get to talk to people who are all either advanced in their academic careers or starting out or halfway, etc. So it's a very stimulating place to get work done, but also to use a sort of a slightly ugly word, but sort of socialize your own ideas, you know. So I've found that already pretty fascinating. And this is a really lovely community of Jesuits and lay people and some priests from other orders who now live at Campion. Yes, so that's why I find myself here. So I'm very grateful to our provincial for letting me have a spell here. And yeah, it's excellent.
And the doctorate itself, Dave, what does it pick up?
Well, this is the point where you're going to have to edit this down. So it's it might help people sleep. Anyone with sleeping disorders out there might watch this. I'll try and be to the point. It's on the relationship between memory and tradition. So in a sense, you know, does the church have a memory? And we like to think she does. It does. But what does that really mean? And then how would that relate to the idea of our living tradition? And in secular so-called memory studies, which has boomed in the last 20 or so years, there's a whole lot of stuff, interdisciplinary stuff from historians, psychologists, philosophers, sociologists, anthropologists, about what is a collective or cultural memory, what makes them stick. Bastille Day, Anzac Day, and of course religious things like Easter. So what's going on there? So I was reading all of this stuff, and it hasn't really made its way into what we call systematic theology so much. Much more scripture studies have absorbed it, because I guess they're in constant interaction with historians, and the memory wars were a big thing in history and still are. So I just thought that was intriguing, and hadn't really made its way into a theology of tradition. Now, I began this doctorate, this is a little embarrassing, 10 years ago, or at least as a master's. And then I thought, I'll just do it part-time whilst working. But of course, that didn't happen. The work was incredibly full on, and I'm grateful to God for that. But it meant this got sidelined. So when I wrapped up my work in young adult ministry, it made sense to go back and finish this. At least that was, the discernment. And the provincial of the time agreed. So here I am.
And that work in young adult ministry, that has been a major part of your ministry for a large part of the time since you were ordained, hasn't it, Dave? And exciting new project for the province that you very much are at the heart of. Could you share a bit about what your vision for that was and how that had unfolded?
Sure. Well, I was a scholastic at St Aloysius College in Milsons Point, one of our schools in Sydney, and I was standing on the sidelines watching the rugby with some of the Year 12 boys, and I distinctly remember one of them. His name's Bernard Greaves. Bernie said to me he'd done one of the school immersions to the Philippines and had been enormously affected by it, and he said, I would love to do something like that again after school, but for longer. Can you help me? And it really just struck me, because I had felt very strongly in a very similar way when I left school. And it was really, really difficult to do that. I found it very difficult. I remember, finding out that the great nephew of a Jesuit went off to India and all that. And I remember being really kind of annoyed because, well, I don't have any Jesuits in my family tree. How the hell do I volunteer somewhere? So it was all a bit difficult. So I thought, bugger it, I'm going to make it easier. So I found him and a good friend of his, Ben, a spot in Vietnam to volunteer with a friend of mine who'd become a bishop over there, the extraordinary Bishop Vien. And they were immersed in this extraordinarily beautiful, tight-knit village, incredibly foreign for two young Australians, very difficult in many ways, physically, but the love they received and gave was just an extraordinary exchange. So I got to set that up. And it grew from there. It just grew from there. I took a group of my studies of religion class in year 12 to visit them. Actually, that was the original trip. I dropped them off like the stork in Vietnam, and it grew and grew from there, to the extent that the provincial then said, when I got ordained, why don't you do this full time? By then I'd given it a name, the Cardoner Project. I then spent the next 10 years building a young adult ministry in Sydney. We got a bank building which was set up explicitly to set up a young adult ministry, which was a wonderful gift of the province to a new work, in an incredible position, an old bank building in the middle of the university precinct in Broadway in Sydney. I honestly believed and still believe it was incredibly providential that we got that site. It was a bit ramshackle. It was an extraordinary team effort to restore it, enormous benefaction in kind and in cash from all sorts of people to develop the ground floor into a bar and a restaurant. And a friend of mine who owns a lot of bars and restaurants just brought his whole team, because I didn't know how to set up a bar and a restaurant. And we had, from day one, we had a couple of hundred young volunteers, because we had a residence upstairs, which was sort of, I like to think of as and of course it's all still there, thanks be to God, a leadership and sort of faith accelerator program for young old boys of our schools. And they brought their friends in. So the first group, there were about 20 of them. They had to bring, I think it was 4 or 5 friends each. And then it spread, it was, viral. So it was a delightful, wonderful and quite stressful time setting up a bar and a restaurant, having a residence upstairs, but by then had a lot of volunteers overseas for up to a year, maybe about 20. That grew beyond that. And then of course we'd take 3-week immersion groups overseas as well to build relationship, to continue the relationship in Vietnam, Thailand, Nepal, and lots of other places.
Dave, you mentioned that sense of when you finished school of wanting to experience service. Would you tell us about the experience that led you into the Jesuits and how it was that you became a Jesuit?
Yeah, look, I was vocations director for a little while whilst doing this other stuff, so I probably wasn't able to do it great justice. But I remember the provincial saying, I'd like to be vocations director. And I said, Steve, is that a good idea? Because my vocation story is a bit of a dog's breakfast, at least from one angle. I prefer to see it as, providence and, both actually, I suppose. They're not mutually exclusive, are they? Life is messy. But I went to Riverview, the Jesuit school in Sydney, for those who don't know. And I loved school. I really did. I took it all on board, shall we say. The Jesuits, of whom Father Robin here was one in the early years, had a huge impact on me. So that's all going on in a sort of tacit way. I wasn't necessarily explicitly reflective on it, though I remember wanting to be a Jesuit, or certainly feeling called, shall we say, or strong feelings when I was in high school. And then, like most young people, I suppose, because it still was a very odd thing to do then. This is I left school 1990. But I went to university, and I remember feeling this wasn't enough. There had to be more. And so I deferred the second year, and I went down and volunteered at Corpus Christi Greenvale, which was then run by a Jesuit director, Father Steve Sin, who's still a very dear friend in the society. And I lived there for 6 months, and it had a huge impact on me in every possible way. And so those men taught me really so much. It's hard to put into words. In only 6 months, but as you know, when you're young, things are dramatic. Things move fast. So I came back and I applied to enter the society, and I did. And I just turned 20. And all the usual things were said to me, especially when you're young, which is you're too young, But I don't think you could have possibly dissuaded me. I felt so called, so strongly invited by the Spirit. So, but then well, this is where it gets a little messy. Then I didn't stay. I stayed for almost 2 years, left before vows, but anyway, came back. Long story short, I'm leaving out a hell of a lot there, but that's another interview. And, the truth is, I look back at my life. You do this in the exercises, as you know, in the first week. And the extraordinary and overwhelming sense that what looked like, a cul-de-sac or a dead end at the time was actually God providing a path. And so an extraordinary sense of gratitude for all of that, all the mess. I'm afraid we don't get much choice in life. Life is messy. If you don't like mess, well, yeah, that's a problem. It's a funny one, in terms of vocation. I have struggled at times, most definitely, with whether I felt I could live this life. A sense of all of that, loneliness at times, or do I really have what's required? Can I really fall on God's grace, abandon myself to that, or do I want to hold back? And sometimes the daydreams in difficult times were often small worlds that I would, alternative realities where I would create for myself, where I could control things more. Or of course, falling in love and all of those daydreams. But the truth is, I'd be very, I think I can honestly say this. When I came back, I had felt a really strong grace that God doesn't change his mind on us, that the original call was real, and to trust in that. And I got to say, I that's been an incredibly powerful driver for me, in that I've not really, truly, deeply doubted my vocation, I don't believe. I have at times felt, I don't have enough petrol in the tank, or I've sort of burnt myself out or whatever, but that's what everyone has to go through. But I didn't actually doubt that this was what God was calling me to. So,
Dave, given that experience of messiness and of trust and of God's mercy, when you're talking to young men about the possibility of religious life, the possibility of joining the Jesuits, what is it that you say to them? You're joining the one society. And we are in a very kind of liquid stage of Jesuit life in this province, because we're in a very, to use that metaphor of liquid modernity, we're in a very that sociologist Bauman uses, and it's pretty evocative. I think we are in a time where now we can pretend to ourselves that somehow
it's business as usual, or it's the status quo, or whatever. Well, that's just crazy. That's denialism. So the point is, though, this is an exciting time for opportunities. If we are true to our vocation as Jesuits, true to we talk about discernment all the time. If we do it, we see there's incredible opportunities for us, but it's not going to look probably like it has looked for the last 100 years or so. So I'd say take the leap of faith. And also, given my own experience, which is a little bit, I wouldn't exactly say it's a pattern for others, but I do think don't be dissuaded by your youth. I think there can be a kind of, what would you say, almost worldly, secular wisdom or something that, don't enter when you're too young. Now, by too young, 20, 21, 22, I would just say, well, don't tell the Holy Spirit what to do. And in actual fact, I think that comes from a place of reservation and possibly fear in older people saying, oh, do you really want to do this? You're giving so much away, all that, okay. But if you enter the life of the society and you trust, it is an extraordinary process of formation and opportunities. So I would say, if you feel strongly called, discern it. Don't feel compulsion, because that's the evil spirit. But if you are impelled, if you are propelled, then be very wary of the evil spirit that wants to dismiss that. And don't make decisions based on fear. If you feel that love, then follow it. And life in the society is quite extraordinary. Anyway.
It's been great having this chance to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you, Jules. I really appreciate it. Just show my coffee mug for the record. Good.
Good. Yeah. Bye.
Thanks so much. See you. Bye-bye.